I am recording this video when only 5.5 hours are left just before the final rounds of the FIDE Candidates Chess Tournament 2024. The game we are going to discuss today is the 13th round between Gukesh versus Alireza Firouzja, which is simply an exciting battle and I don't want to waste any further time, so let's start. So Gukesh starts the game with 1 e4 and Alireza replies with e5. So already Gukesh is tied in the first place with Hikaru Nakamura and Ian Nakamura, whereas Alireza is not having a good tournament. So we have knight f3, knight to c6, and we have the move bishop to b5, the royal is opening. And here we have the move knight to f6 by Alireza Firouzja, also the Berlin defense. Why it is called the Berlin defense? Because the main move in this position is to continue with short castle, and now we have knight into e4, d4, knight d6, and here white is having two ways. White can either go for capturing the knight or can go for capturing the pawn. If you capture with the knight, takes, pawn takes, knight f5, and you can trade off the queen, check, and eventually it's an even position because black is having the bishop pair in exchange of losing his castling rights, and it's eventually a draw. Going back, after takes, d4, here if white goes for capturing the pawn, takes, and it looks like black is a piece up, but eventually after a4 you can't really defend the knight on b5. So knight d4, takes, d5, we can trade off the pawn and we can just claim a draw by repeating the position, because if you just try to trade off the queen, now black is having the bishop pair and black is the one who is actually better. So that's the whole point of playing this position with the main line of short castling. That's the main reason. If you want to draw, you can just go for the main line with short castle. But if you have the move d3, because Gukesh is having the white pieces and he's fighting for the win because he wants to claim the first position. So we have the move d3, bishop to c5, the main move, short castle, knight to d4. You can also play the move d6, it's perfectly fine. Knight d4, we have a knight trade, knight to d2, c6, bishop to c4, and here we have the move d6. Like d5 looks a very tempting move because the pawn is actually on c6 guarding the d5 square, but it's a bad move because after takes, it looks like black is having a perfect center. But after bishop b5 check, bishop d7, we have a bishop trade, knight to f3, and somehow you can't move the bishop because the e5 pawn is hanging. And the point here, if you simply do a short castle, I'm not really going to capture the bishop, ruin your pawn structure, but instead I'm going to play the move c3 and eventually kick your bishop and capture the pawn, and I'm a pawn up and having a better position. So that's the main idea of white in this position. So black should not go for the move d5. So we have the move d6, c3 kicking the bishop, and here we have the move bishop to b3. It's a very common idea, bishop b3, the idea is to play the move knight c4 and attack the bishop. So a5 grabbing more space on the queen side, knight to c4, bishop to a7, and now we have the move by Gukesh after taking around 20 minutes on his clock, knight to e3. Like, what's the idea of knight e3? So the idea of knight e3 in this position here is, white want to play queen to f3, knight to f5, bishop to g5, grabbing, basically putting the pieces on the king side to put maximum pressure on the king, which is going to simply short castle in the future, because you can't really do a long castle because it would be a simply bad option because you are already expanding your queen side. But here the main question was, should white play a4 in this position, because it simply stops the idea of b5, and then white can actually go for the same idea of the stuff like this, knight to e3, knight to f5. But okay, we have the move knight to e3 by Gukesh, trying something new, and now here Alireza took around 13 minutes on his clock and he played the move short castle. So after short castle, we have the move queen to f3, d5. So finally Alireza decided to open up the center with the move d5. I like this move pretty much because whenever any side of the player tries to attack your king, it's the best option to open up the center. So we have the move d5, and here we have the move bishop to c2. So a move like e5 looks a very common move in every normal chess player eyes. But the point here is, after e5, black is having a very strong move. You can pause the video and try to think. Okay, the point here is not to capture this pawn, because then white can be simply a pawn up. But the point here is, black wants to play the move a4, And the point here is after a4 the bishop is attacked. And okay, after a4 white is already having many options to continue the game. If bishop to c2, simply take, and black is already having a very good center. If bishop to c4, black can already chop off the knight first, very important. Takes, and now can play the move b5, attacking the bishop. And after takes, c7, because basically attacking the rook and the queen. Simply queen g5, having a queen trade, and eventually bishop e6, and the pawns are lost and black is winning the game. So that's why bishop c4 is also a bad idea. And if you go for simply capturing the pawn on a4, already bishop e3 capturing the knight, and eventually capturing the bishop on a4, black is a piece up and eventually winning the game. So that's exactly what happens if white goes for capturing the pawn on d5, which is simply a bad idea. So that's why after d5, Gukesh, instead of capturing the pawn, play the move bishop to c2, which is very logical. You are basically defending the pawn. g6, taking away the f5 square from the knight. Rook to e1. So Gukesh's idea is now to take on d5 and try to open up his rook on e1. Bishop to e6, and now we have simply finally ed5. cd5, and now we have the move h3. Taking the square from the bishop and the knight of g4, and also making a square for the king on h2 so that there would be no back rank mate in the future. And now we have the move rook to e8 by Alireza Firouzja, which was simply not the best move. Here Alireza was having two ideas. He could have played something like bishop b8, putting the bishop on a good diagonal. Maybe the idea could be to play the move e4 in the future, or simply king g7 with the idea of queen d7, rook g8, and black is already having a fine position. But going back, after h3 we have the move rook to e8, which kind of allowed Gukesh to play the move bishop to a4. And the point here is after bishop a4 you really do not want to play the move rook to f8 back, because it's simply, you basically commit that the rook e8 was simply a mistake. So that's the whole point. Bishop a4, we have the move e4 by Alireza Firouzja, trying to simply advance the center pawns, grab more space in the center. And the point here is after e4, I thought quite a while, trying to understand the idea of e4. The point here is, if you simply try to, for example, simply take the queen back, the idea here is black can actually capture the pawn and can simply put the knight, first rook e7 of course, and the idea could be simply put the knight to e4, which is simply a good idea for black. And there could be some potential bishop f5 ideas, or even some advanced pawn ideas d4. So that's the whole idea of not taking the queen back at first, capturing the pawn on e4. The point here is, knight into e4, it looks kind of a good move, but the point here is, you lose the rook. So you are not really having the time to capture the pawn with the knight. So black is kind of forced to capture the pawn with the pawn. And now white is having the additional option of playing the move queen to e2. Queen e2, and now you have to move the rook to e7. And now the question is, I want to ask you guys a question. Pause the video and try to think, how are you going to continue the position if you're playing with the white pieces? Okay, so after rook to e7, if you try to understand the position, white has not yet successfully developed all his pieces. So the best idea would be to develop the bishop to c1. But the question is, how to develop the bishop? Do you want to put the bishop to d2, which is simply a bad square? If you found the move knight to f1, brilliant move. The idea is to simply bishop to e3, challenge the bishop, and now simply get another rook to d1 attacking the queen. Queen to c7, and after queen c7 idea is very interesting. Black's idea is to play bishop c4 and attack the queen. So we have the move first, bishop b3, not allowing bishop c4 so easily. a4 by Alireza Firouzja, a very cunning move. The whole point here is, capturing the pawn is simply a blunder, because after bishop c4, capturing the knight, basically taking away the h2 square control, and after takes bishop b8, threatening checkmate in one, and also threatening to capture the bishop, and eventually white loses a piece, and eventually the game. So that's why bishop a4 is simply a blunder. We have the bishop trade, and now we have the move bishop to e3 by Gukesh. a3, and now we have the move c4 by Gukesh. A very interesting idea. Basically his idea here is, if for example if black captures the pawn, takes, you can't really capture the pawn because after takes, but first white can also play rook c1, but simply capturing the pawn, and now somehow black is having this resource with queen to d5, or else black loses everything. So queen d5, and after queen d5, white can simply go back with queen b4, takes, the knight queen moves, and eventually white is having a healthy pawn. So, and basically after c4, your idea is simply to even advance the pawn in the future. So you are simply advancing the pawn now. And also after c4, you are also taking away the d5 square from the knight. So after c4, we have the move knight to h5. The idea is very interesting. The idea could be to play the move f5-4, and also the idea could be to capture the bishop in the future, and also play knight to f4 and simply put the knight to e3, which could be a very dangerous knight for white. So after knight to h5, we have the move g3 covering everything, and now simply bishop to c5, b3, basically having a good pawn structure, f5, and now we have a bishop trade, and now rook to d1. And here black played the move rook to f8. But the question is, what's the wrong with the move f4 directly, which looks a very scary move for the white at the first glance. After f4, the whole point here is white can play the move queen to g4, attacking the rook. And after here, black can play the move rook to f6. And now here's my question. Try to pause the video and try to tell me what would be your move if you're playing with the white pieces. Okay, so I'm pretty sure that many of you guys would have thought rook d5 attacking the queen and also at the same time threatening to capture the knight, and eventually white wins a piece. But guys, it's simply a blunder because it allows f into g3. Now the idea is to simply capture the pawn and threatening simply mating ideas. So you kinda have to capture the queen, but it simply allows check and simply making a new queen, and eventually black is completely winning suddenly. So that's the only trick black is having with rook f6. So you must be ready for it, and you must play rook e2, defending the f2 pawn. So after takes, you take with the knight, and after knight f4, you are having this knight into e4, attacking the queen and the rook at the same time. And after knight takes the rook, you must be clever enough to find the move king to f1, which is extremely hard actually, because if you try to capture the knight with the queen, we have the move rook e6, takes rook e2, and somehow black is the better one and winning the game. So that's the whole point. Playing king f1, attacking the queen, you have to move the queen, and now finally capturing the rook, queen into e2, and now white is better. So that's the whole crazy variation why f4 is such a bad idea. So we have the move rook to f8 by Firouzja. Now he's preparing to play the move f4, but now we have the move rook d5 and eventually playing the move f4, simply shutting down black's idea of playing the move f4 first. You can't really pass them because you lose the rook in this position. So after f4, we have the move knight to f6, attacking the rook. Rook goes back, g5, knight e3, takes, queen f7, king h2, knight to h5, queen f2, defending the pawn, rook to d5, attacking the pawn on f5, knight to g7, defending the pawn, rook d1, and here we have a repetition position. And now the point here is, if Gukesh plays rook d1, it's a draw, but he plays the move queen to h4, not repeating the position thrice. Queen h4, takes, we have a rook trade, king to h8, king f2, rook to g8, and now we have the move queen to g5 by Gukesh, which was not the best. He could have played queen to h6 because the whole point here is knight e6 is simply a bad move in the position because the f5 pawn is collapsing and white is better. But Gukesh played the move queen g5 instead. And here Alireza already made a blunder via playing queen g6. We are going to come to that later, but the best move was to play knight e6, which is actually pretty inhuman, I would say. Inhuman, because after knight e6 you attack the queen. The whole point, after queen into f5, black is going to play queen g7, threatening mate. So white have to play queen d5 or queen e5, forcefully trading off the queen. And if you try to capture with the pawn, already I can give some check and eventually get in with the rook. So it's already a bad idea to capture with the pawn. So you must capture with the rook. But now here comes the very lengthy variation. Simply knight into f4, takes, knight h3, rook f8, trying to play rook f2 check, takes, and it's actually a draw. But it's still not a very easy draw to make if you're playing against a human, because white is having 2 pawns connected, whereas black is having 2 pawns isolated at the corner of the board. The point here is knight f2, king to c3, just giving you a quick glance of how to draw the position. Rook e2 attacking the knight, giving a check, pushing the pawn, and here knight to d1. The point is after takes, if you play c7 check, I can play rook c1 check and control this and just try to push the pawn. And so that's why, and my idea is to simply attack the knight and also give a check. So we have the move knight to d5, check, check, forcefully trading off the knight, and eventually pushing up the e2 pawn now this time. And so the trading of the basically capturing the pawn, you can't capture the rook because black will make a queen, and this is the draw. So a very lengthy draw, but yeah, just giving you a sample line. Queen to g6, and here this was the final blunder of the game, because here we have simply queen to 8, and now simply rook to d6 by Gukesh, attacking the pawn. The point here is like we have the move rook to e8 in the game, not defending the pawn, because if you try to play like something like knight h5, already knight d5, protecting the pawn, and also already getting in rook d7, and it's already a very extremely bad position for black, because the knight on h5 is already on the side of the board, all the pieces are passive, there are lots of weakness, and eventually knight e7 is also coming up. The position is going to eventually collapse for black. And if you play something like king h7, I can still play the move rook to b6, attacking the pawn, and if I try to defend it, it's still knight d5, and it's still the case, I can simply push the pawn and win the game. So going back, that's the whole idea, reason Alireza did not went for protecting the pawn. Takes knight to e6. So now Alireza's all hope is on the pawn on e4. Knight to d5, knight to d4, rook to b6, takes, and now we have the move rook to e6. Like, it looks like, can you push the pawn? But the problem here is king e2, knight to d4 check, king to d3, and you can't really push the pawn because of knight to f6, and somehow it's a force mate on h7. You can't really defend it. So after knight f6, you can't make a queen because it's a mate, so you have to play the move rook check. If I capture the rook, you can make a queen, and it's losing for white now. So white is going to capture the knight. And here after rook h3, covering the square, white can play the move rook e7, capture the knight, and capture the pawn, and eventually win the game. So that's why e3 is not really working. So Alireza first played the move rook to e6, covering the f6 square. Rook e7 now forcing a rook trade. Alireza already obviously denying the trade, and now already Gukesh started to push his asset, the biggest asset of the game, pushing his c pawn. Knight to d4, trying to stop the pawn push. King to g2, defending the pawn. Check. We have Alireza obviously wants Gukesh to repeat the position, but obviously b4, nobody is going to repeat the position in this position. b4, pushing up the pawn, takes, sacrificing the pawn, and already king g2. Rook goes back to cover the 6th rank obviously, and now rook b7, a very interesting move. The idea is pretty clear, to push the b pawn, because like Gukesh can also push the c pawn, but why to give any risk of going into this particular position where you can already push the b6 pawn, not allowing knight to go sacrifice for the 2 pawns. Rook check, king f2, rook here, already rook c7, check, allowing check, but after king g3, on the move number 63, Alireza Firouzja with the black pieces decided to resign the position, because the idea is pretty clear. Even if you try to somehow capture the pawn, push the pawn, and you try to hit the pawn, problem here is the king is on the 8th rank, so white can happily give a check, and now eventually make it a queen, and it's completely losing. Takes, push the pawn, and I can simply stop the pawn and eventually win the game. So that is the whole reason Alireza Firouzja decided to resign the game on the 63rd move, which actually made Gukesh the sole leader of the tournament after the 13th round, where only the final round, the 14th round, is remaining, where Caruana Fabiano actually beat Pragnananda on the 13th round to have the second place shared with Ian Opamniachi and Hikaru Nakamura, because in the 13th round, Hikaru Nakamura was paired up against Ian Opamniachi. The game eventually ended in a draw. So the standings after the 13th round are: Gukesh is leading the first place with 8.5 points. Ian Opamniachi, Hikaru Nakamura, and Fabiano Caruana is leading the second place with the 8 points. Pragnanda is having the 5th position with the 6 points. Vidit is having 6th position with the 5.5 points. Alireza Firouzja is having the 7th place with the 4.5 points, and Nijit Basov with the 8th position with 3.5 points. And finally, only the last round is remaining. It's going to be very tricky. Who is going to be the next candidate who is going to challenge the world champion Ding Liren? We are going to see we are going to see that soon. So I don't want to waste any further time. Thank you for watching, and if you like the video, like the game, make sure to like the video, share this video with everyone, and make sure to subscribe to our channel if you are new to our channel. I'm going to see you soon, so till then stay tuned and keep watching Oneshot Chess.